What's something a friend did that made you end your friendship?
Story 1. I was run over by a drunk driver years ago. I died temporarily and had to be revived at the hospital. Both of my brothers told my best friend of over 20 years what had happened. Not once did he reach out to see how I was, ask if I was okay, or wish me well. I was hurt by it, but I tried to make some sense of it. Maybe he just didn't know what to say, or he was shocked by the news, or he wanted to give me space to recover. Months later, I was home, but still on crutches and could barely move without a great deal of pain. I reached out to my friend on the phone, talked a bit, and asked if he wanted to come over to watch a movie, play some games, and just hang out. I was lonely and missed him. He seemed interested but asked if I could walk to his house in December on icy roads, barely able to hobble around on crutches, to hang out there instead. He lived 0.2 miles from me and couldn't be bothered to drive or walk the roughly 5 minutes to my house. I stopped talking to him shortly after that. Story 2. Maybe nothing dramatic, but my best friend from university came back to visit his parents, who live in the same city as me, and we planned to have dinner. I knew he had been super flaky in university, so I kept my week open, knowing he wouldn't decide when he was available until the last minute. I was so excited to introduce him to my fiancée and show him our new house. We got everything ready for a really nice dinner. The day before we were supposed to have dinner, he texted me saying he didn't feel like driving over from his parents' house, 30 minutes away, because he might be tired. I was upset that he was flaking on such important plans, but I offered to bring all the dinner stuff and drive out to him instead. He said, "No thanks." That's when I realized he really didn't care about anything happening in my life and was still as immature as he'd been in university. I decided it wasn't a friendship I wanted to maintain anymore. Story 3. She decided she no longer wanted to take care of her cat of about 5 years and casually mentioned that she was going to drop him off at the local animal shelter. When I told her it was a high-kill shelter, they put animals to sleep if they haven't been claimed or adopted within 3 days. She just shrugged her shoulders and went to get the cat carrier. That was the end of the friendship for me, but I still convinced her to take him to a no-kill shelter about 45 minutes away that relies heavily on fostering. Oh, but suddenly she wasn't feeling well enough to drive. Could I take her? She promised to pay for my gas. Yeah, right. Still, I cared about her cat, so we went. When we got there, there was an $8 surrender fee for people giving up their own pets, so the shelter could get the animal's name and medical history. Without missing a beat, she said, "Oh, this is just a stray I found in our town, but since they have a high-kill shelter there, I convinced my friend to come with me to drop it off." The woman working there smiled, called her a kind soul, and gave her a sticker. My friend flashed a huge, proud smile and said, pretending to be modest, "Wow, thanks so much. You know, you're the 4th person to tell me that this week. Maybe I should start believing it, haha." She didn't even say goodbye to her cat, just turned around and walked out. I was so stunned, not to mention furious, that I simply followed her back to the car, didn't say a word on the way home, and avoided her after that. Looking back, I wish I'd told the shelter staff the truth and paid the $8 myself, but I was in shock. How cold can someone be? Ugh. Story 4. My best friend of 10 years and her husband had a falling out with my brother because he chose to stay out of a situation they were having with another mutual friend. He didn't want to get involved, and I agreed he shouldn't. Over time, they became nasty and bitter about it, and eventually lied to my brother's new wife, telling her he had cheated on her with one of our other friends. I knew for a fact that wasn't true. They kept making up stories and feeding her lies about him, which eventually destroyed their marriage by creating mistrust and conflict. His wife already struggled with mental health issues, and this only made things worse. They eventually divorced. I cut them out of my life after that. Since then, they've apologized and admitted to making up all those stories out of hurt and bitterness because my brother wouldn't take their side in the conflict, but it's far too late. My brother's marriage was destroyed, and so was our friendship. There's no coming back from that. By the way, the reason my brother didn't get involved was because they were the ones in the wrong. And if he had told them that, imagine how much worse their revenge would have been. They're unhinged. And, fittingly, their own marriage has since fallen apart. Karma. Story 5. I had a friend who was a terrible drunk, extremely sensitive to alcohol, and would easily slip into blackout mode. When he got drunk, all he wanted to do was mess with people and cause chaos. One night, he was already pretty drunk, and none of us felt like dealing with him. so we went out without him. When we came home around 11 that night, he had invited a bunch of sketchy people into our house, all of them obnoxiously drunk. He was half passed out on the couch after burning a huge hole in our carpet because he'd gone into my room and used my hookah setup. I went upstairs and found random people I'd never seen before hanging out in different bedrooms. Some were smoking weed on my bed. Others were snorting coke off the toilet tank lid in my bathroom. One drunk guy was yelling at someone on the phone, giving them our address, and telling them to bring everyone over. We kicked everyone out, which of course turned into a huge scene and argument. We kicked him out the next day and haven't spoken to him since. Story 6. I was going through therapy for PTSD and was right in the thick of it. Everything felt raw, and I was incredibly fragile. Part of my therapy involved writing out everything that had happened on paper. It was a few years ago, so I don't fully remember the reasoning, but I think it had to do with owning my own narrative. I asked if I could go to my best friend's place to do it. We'd been best mates since we were 13, and I just needed someone I trusted in the next room in case things went south. I was 99% sure I'd be okay, but I felt safer having him nearby. I needed a friend, but I tried to make my request as minimal as possible. He then lied to me about going overseas for 2 months. When I caught him in the lie, he blamed his mother. When I forgave him and suggested we grab lunch, he stood me up and left me waiting in a parking lot for 2 hours after I had just driven an hour to see him. I understandably lost it and told him exactly how hurtful and awful his behavior was. That was 6 years ago. I don't expect to ever hear from him again. It's not about going through therapy alone or being abandoned. It's the fact that he just couldn't be honest with me. A simple no would have been perfectly fine. Story 7. She had been a longtime friend of my husband and his ex-wife, but like him, she cut the ex-wife off because of her behavior. This friend and I became very close. She helped him plan the proposal and was even in our wedding. 6 months after the wedding, she was one of the first to find out I was pregnant. Her immediate reaction was, "I knew you were looking a little fat." Mind you, I'm a petite woman and weighed maybe 120 pounds at the time. A few weeks later, she suddenly became friends with the ex-wife again, the same person she'd claimed to hate and had told me all of her most personal, private secrets about, which never sat right with me, and I shared much less with her after that. She told my husband she didn't want bad blood anymore and wanted to make peace with people she felt had wronged her. Yeah, right, because soon after, she started feeding the ex-wife tons of information about me and my husband. She got caught when the ex-wife slipped up and mentioned our unborn son's name, something only 4 people knew: me, my husband, my mom, and this friend. When confronted, she panicked, denied it, and then doubled down by trying to tell my husband all the things I had confided in her, including my early hesitations about marriage because he hadn't yet gotten sober at that time, even though he'd been sober for a full year before our wedding and has now been for over 8 years. I later learned she was a massive enabler, telling me she agreed he was an alcoholic while simultaneously telling him I was gaslighting him. She basically tried to burn down my marriage while I was pregnant. Luckily, it backfired. My husband and I talked everything through, understood each other's perspectives, and came out stronger, without anger or resentment. It all came out later that she had been in love with my husband for years, even during his first marriage. She watched that relationship fall apart and played the supportive friend role, then hovered through my entire relationship and engagement with him, secretly hoping I'd leave. She actively encouraged it when he was struggling with sobriety, keeping me close just to wait in the wings. But then he got sober, happy, married, and had a baby on the way, and she couldn't enable him anymore. What a miserable, toxic person. Even his ex-wife won't speak to her now after realizing how manipulative she was. Recently, I heard she used some guy to get pregnant and then refused to let the father see his child. Even gave the kid some overly dramatic name. Unbelievable. Story 8. She was unvaccinated and refused to take a COVID test before seeing me. My mother was terminally ill and severely immunocompromised, so I was doing everything I could to minimize the risk of catching COVID and potentially losing my chance to spend time with her. Despite my calm and reasonable requests and clear explanations, she refused to take a test twice, claiming she didn't want to get a sinus infection. This was back when COVID tests were nasal swabs, not mouth swabs. You know, the sterile ones that don't cause infections. I'm completely sure it wasn't about a sinus infection. It was about control. She'd already been annoyed that I hadn't validated her anti-vax stance in the past. Similarly, I know she wanted more validation for her religious beliefs, which she'd adopted in her 30s and which I didn't share. I told her I was happy her faith made her happy, but I think she wanted me to actually believe the same things. I'd also once said her sister's bisexuality was fine with me when she commented that a wedding between two women was not what God wants. I think all of those differences in perspective threatened the way she saw the world and herself. Her last text thanked me for sharing my views about COVID and its potential to kill my mom, then turned pseudo-concerned when I didn't reply. I read the whole situation as her saying, "I want to say whatever I want to you, but I still want to feel like a nice person, so please reply and give me that validation." I never replied, but sometimes I still wonder if the more mature thing would have been to respond clearly and say I didn't want to stay in contact. It's taken me over a year to work through the pain and finally be able to articulate what I might have said. We'd been friends since our first days of high school, over 20 years. In the end, we just grew into very different people, but I can't pretend that her attitude toward my mom and the horrible journey my family went through wasn't absolutely devastating. Life can be painfully cruel sometimes, that's for sure. Story 9. My best friend from high school went off to college and changed quite a bit during those 4 years away. That's no big deal. Everyone changes a lot during those formative years. I went to a different college in another state, and I'm sure I changed a lot too. He was still the funniest person I've ever known. Incredibly smart, sharp, and always fun to be around. He had such a mature worldview and a brilliantly dry sense of humor. Honestly, he reminded me of Stephen Colbert, witty, quick, clever, and effortlessly funny. I truly admired him. He went on to become a very successful attorney. We always had slightly different social and political views. He leaned more conservative than I did, but it was never a big deal. Over time, though, it became more of a dividing line, mostly for him. He joined a young conservatives group in college, and that seemed to change him a lot, and not for the better, at least in my opinion. Our once playful and respectful disagreements turned into debates, and then into increasingly nasty arguments. It was sad and hard to watch our friendship unravel like that. I still think about those conversations and wish they had gone differently. Around the same time, after college, I happened to reconnect with a girl we both knew from high school. It's the classic story. I had just gotten out of a long-term relationship, and she had recently ended an engagement. We both happened to be back in our hometown for the weekend and randomly ran into each other at a grocery store while buying greeting cards. It was a terrible time for either of us to start something new, especially long distance, but we did it anyway. It began casually, grew steadily, and eventually became serious. That relationship led to us dating, getting married, and having 2 kids. 19 years later, we're still happily together, all thanks to that random encounter at the grocery store. A few days before I was going to propose, my old friend reached out and asked if we could meet for a beer. I hadn't seen him in a while, and I thought it might be a good chance to reconnect. I even planned to ask him to be part of the wedding out of respect for our long friendship. But when I got there, he came at me in a completely different way, hyper-aggressive and hostile. He told me I needed to break things off with her because he had dated her briefly a decade earlier, when we were teenagers, and that me proposing to her was basically a declaration of war. It was bizarre, irrational, and honestly gave off serious mental instability vibes. I calmly told him that I was still going to ask her to marry me, and that was that. We parted ways, and that was the end of our friendship. There were some tense moments right after that, but eventually things settled down. Years later, I ran into him once. He was with his wife and their beautiful young daughter. It was polite but distant. I haven't seen or spoken to him since, and I doubt I ever will. I still feel sad about how it all ended. It shouldn't have gone that way. After everything, we should at least be able to text or stay connected on social media, but we're not. Sometimes, that's just how life goes. Story 10. A few years ago, I had a friend named Mark. We'd been inseparable since childhood, sharing secrets, dreams, and countless memories. But one incident shattered our friendship and forced me to make a painful decision. Mark and I had always been there for each other through thick and thin. We supported each other's ambitions and had an unspoken promise to stand by one another no matter what. That trust, however, would be tested in a way I never saw coming. One summer, I hit a rough patch. Personal struggles and financial problems left me feeling lost and desperate. I confided in Mark, pouring my heart out and seeking comfort in our friendship. He seemed sympathetic and assured me he'd do anything to help. A few weeks later, when I was at my lowest, Mark came to me with what sounded like a generous offer. He said he had a business opportunity that could help me get back on my feet. Desperate for a way out, I agreed to hear him out. Mark introduced me to a multi-level marketing (MLM) scheme, insisting it was the solution to my financial problems. He told me stories of quick success and promised it could change my life. I was skeptical, but I trusted him completely. So, I invested a significant amount of money and time into the MLM, believing it would be my escape from financial stress. Mark was my upline, and I worked tirelessly to build my network, convinced I was on the road to success. Months went by, and reality started to hit. The MLM was draining my savings, and I was no closer to financial stability. I finally did some research and discovered the harsh truth. The vast majority of people lose money in MLMs. I felt completely betrayed, not just by the company, but by my best friend who had led me into it. When I confronted Mark, I was furious and heartbroken. He defended himself, saying he genuinely believed in the MLM and had only wanted to help. But it was clear that he'd prioritized his own financial gain over our friendship and my well-being. That day, I made the difficult decision to end our friendship. It wasn't easy. We had a lifetime of history, but I couldn't keep a relationship built on deception and selfishness. Mark had destroyed the trust that had held us together for years. Ending my friendship with him was one of the hardest choices I've ever made, but also one of the most important. It taught me the value of trust, honesty, and integrity, and the importance of protecting my own well-being. I may have lost a friend, but I gained a lesson that stayed with me ever since. Story 11. She treated me like hired help at her wedding. My childhood best friend got married right after college. She wanted to keep things simple and have her two sisters and his sister as bridesmaids, but she asked me to provide the ceremony music. Of course, I totally understood. I was a music performance major, so I asked my quintet if they'd play at a discounted rate while my now husband and I played for free. No problem. Fast forward, and suddenly two other friends of hers became bridesmaids. One because she'd been a bridesmaid in that girl's wedding and felt obligated to return the favor, and the other because she'd written her a 4-page letter about how hurt she was to be left out. Fine, whatever. I thought those were ridiculous reasons to include someone, but she was always an insufferable people pleaser. She told me I could wear black like the bridesmaids, and they'd give me matching flowers so I'd feel like part of the bridal party. She also said I'd be included in the photos, which I really appreciated. When the day came, her wedding planner clearly had no idea I was an actual friend and not just a vendor. We were shoved into a corner for most of the day, placed at the very last table for dinner, and ignored entirely otherwise. I had also done her makeup for free, since I'd always done it when we were growing up. I tried to stick around for photos, but I was shooed away. In the end, there were only 2 pictures of me, both the back of my head. What really stung, though, was what happened afterward. Every other vendor got paid the day of the wedding, but she mailed our payment weeks later, and it was less than the agreed amount. I had to call her to get a corrected check, and she gave me some flimsy excuse before finally sending the right one a couple of weeks after that. By then, I had already paid my friends out of pocket, and we'd even learned all new music specifically for her ceremony. That whole check situation was the only time I heard from her after the wedding. I never heard from her again. She had always been desperate for approval, constantly changing herself to be liked. I think I reminded her of who she used to be. The guy she married basically pressured and guilt her into it, and after that, she cut off her family completely for his. She was brilliant and ambitious once, but she gave up every part of her true self to become whatever everyone else wanted her to be. There had been other red flags before, like the time she told our closeted gay friend that all gay people would burn in hell. That's when I knew she was too far gone. Story 12. I had a friend years ago that I grew pretty close to for a few years. Let's call him A. On the side, we were friends with benefits on and off, no strings attached, and it worked out great. If either of us started dating someone, that part of things stopped immediately, no hard feelings at all. But over time, his behavior started getting really strange. For example, when I invited him to my birthday one year, the first thing he said when he arrived was, "I didn't bring a gift." It was such an odd thing to announce, especially since I didn't care about presents at all and just wanted my guests to feel comfortable. Then, during the same party, he went over to the couch and fell asleep. just passed out in the middle of my birthday. It was unbelievably awkward and embarrassing. Another time, I invited him to a small New Year's Eve gathering at a friend's house, my friend B, who lived with his brother. Everyone there knew of him but weren't close with him. I was the only one who really knew him. There were about 8 of us total. At one point, he disappeared, and after looking around, we found him asleep in B's brother's bed. He hadn't asked permission or said anything. He just went in and made himself comfortable. They woke him up and told me, and I was mortified. It was so inappropriate and embarrassing. That was the last time he was ever invited to anything. As time went on, his personality shifted drastically. He became really spiritual and started claiming he could see ghosts or sense energies or something like that. Then he began trying to convert everyone around him to his new beliefs. When I confronted him, he denied it, but talking to him became uncomfortable and weird. He even changed how he texted. He decided to spice things up by not using commas or periods at all. It made his messages almost impossible to read. I had to really focus just to understand a single sentence. I asked him nicely to stop because it gave me a headache to read, but he brushed it off and said he found it refreshing. Eventually, he changed so much that we just became incompatible. I started replying less, stopped initiating contact, and finally told him outright that we should end the friendship. So we did. He was also incredibly selfish. Once, he called me out of the blue to ask if I had ever had chlamydia. I said no. Then he asked me to go get tested. I was confused. Why would I need to get tested? He told me he'd recently slept with his ex and was worried about possibly having chlamydia. I told him that if he was the one who had sex, he was the one who needed to go get checked. He said he didn't want to because the doctor would stick a cotton swab into his penis, and I just stared at my phone in disbelief. Like what? I told him that I'd have to spread my legs and get swabbed internally. So why exactly should I be the one doing it when I hadn't even slept with anyone? It was ridiculous. I wasn't mad about him sleeping with someone else. We didn't have that kind of arrangement. But asking me to go see a doctor because he made a risky choice was just insane. After we stopped being friends, he tried reaching out a few times over the years, still texting in that unreadable, punctuation-free style, but I never responded. That friendship was over. I didn't need that nonsense in my life. If you enjoyed the video, don't forget to leave a like and subscribe, activate the notification bell, and share a similar story or anything you'd like to say in the comments. See you next time.